Welcome to another of our chats, which we're putting on this autumn 2020 in Music at Queen's as a kind of placeholder for the concerts that we dearly wanted to bring you and alas are not able to this autumn. We've heard from musicians already working in several different fields, among them classical chamber music, and I'm delighted that today's guests are rising stars in the classical field and instrumentalists who are getting terrific reputations already, although certainly in one case you'll find out that they are still a student. So it's very exciting for me to welcome Braimah Kanneh Mason and Tom Fetherstonhaugh. They were to come to us as part of a series that we'd planned to celebrate Beethoven in his year. Not that everybody else isn't already celebrating Beethoven or planned to, but I particularly wanted to feature some of the big chamber music that doesn't get heard so much. So one of the things we're going to be talking about is Beethoven's biggest violin and piano sonata, the Kreutzer Sonata, which was to feature this week in November and will in fact feature when we do get to welcome Tom and Braimah next year, probably in the 21-22 season. So welcome guys, thank you very much for joining us at Music at Queen's. I've begun with most of our chats by just asking people about the circumstances of this year, because I think it's very interesting for those who wish they could listen to music to hear about those who wish they could perform it. I mean, presumably there was a period this year where you just couldn't do anything. Braimah, did you find it difficult to keep taking the fiddle out of the case and play, or was it a difficult time altogether?
Yeah, I mean, of course it was a difficult time for everyone, and certainly musicians as well. I personally felt very lucky that I was still in a position that I was studying. So although of course it was very heartbreaking and very sad and very difficult to kind of see the year, each thing that you were looking forward to and preparing to very hard, falling off the calendar one by one and stretching out further than you had anticipated, I still took to the violin and enjoyed the freedom of just preparing for my lessons without anything else going on. So I think I just tried to make the most of it, like many other students tried to do.
Mm. Do you feel that it was insidious to morale? I mean, when your life is usually so full of the next lesson, the next recital, the next rehearsal, if you take that out, is that difficult? Do you think that you and your friends and everybody suffered in kind of less obvious ways?
Of course, structure is very, very important, and we need structure. Without structure, it's very, very difficult to set yourself goals and to really work towards something and improve. But I still had, Academy were very good in the sense you still had, they tried to do lots of things online, from lectures to seminars, and of course your regular lessons. So I still had the structure of the lessons. And with my family, we were also doing 2 live stream concerts a week. So that was also a structure that we put in for ourselves as well. So that was also something that we were working towards. So although so much of the structure fell out, we put more structure in, and we still had the lessons and try to focus on that. That's
a fantastic creative response to a situation where I think a lot of us just sort of sat down and thought, what do we do next? What about you, Tom? Was it a very kind of empty time? I mean, I'm talking about it in the past, but it's still going on. I mean, I know that it isn't empty for you recently, but how was it when it first happened?
Yeah, I think as with all musicians, and as Braimah has just said, it was very kind of soul destroying and very upsetting when things kept on getting cancelled. And as you say, we're kind of in a way back in the same position as we were now, back in March, and things are now getting cancelled into the new year, and that's all quite hard to process, I think. And I found it quite hard to want to prepare for things that I know might still be not going ahead or might be postponed into either next year or the year after that. And so it's been quite a big test, I think, for lots of people on how to keep yourself motivated. And I think I've really enjoyed not having the pressure of performing all the time, actually, and just kind of accepting that it's a nice time to learn new repertoire and take things at the pace that I feel comfortable with, rather than always being under pressure to perform for the next thing. I think that's been something that I've really, really enjoyed. Yeah.
What musicians always seem to be asked about this year is, did you find it hard to practice, without those things? I mean, does that just go on as a kind of, or in whatever instrument, or I suppose in conducting in terms of score learning, does that just keep going? Or did you ever have the feeling of the sort of plug having been pulled out as the actual mechanics of keeping the fingers going and things?
Yeah, I mean, I gave myself various projects during the first lockdown. So I did one of the Bach 48 Preludes and Fugues every day. So that took me up to day 48, and then I had to find something else to do. So then I started the Goldberg variations, and I did one a day. So then that took me, that did the next 32 days. And then I think I then kind of did some other things I can't remember. Some Schubert impromptus, I think. That was only, yeah, anyway. So I think like setting goals like that really, really helped me get through the period. But yeah, the other side of what I do is lots of conducting, and of course orchestra is classed as a mass gathering, and so that was really hard to kind of process that the thing that you're training to do and love doing is kind of illegal. That sounds very dramatic, but that's effectively was what was the case. So yeah, I tried to do as much kind of score learning and study and reading and all of this stuff, but ultimately, if you can't do the final thing, which is actually getting up and collaborating with the musicians live in a room, then that's obviously quite hard.
That's terrible. I mean, I know for conductors who are having careers, even now, it's also absolutely nerve-wracking losing so many concerts. But recently you have been active, haven't you, Tom, in terms of conducting? I mean, there was something going on until recently. Just tell us about that.
Yeah, the window between kind of live performance being banned and live performance now being banned, which was about, September, bit of August, and then September and October, so 2.5 months. I was really fortunate enough to be able to do some concerts. And we did some concerts with my orchestra, Fantasia Orchestra, and Braimah's brother, Sheku. And we played a program which included the Dvorak Cello Concerto, and we gave 2 concerts in London and 2 in Wells in Somerset. And it was very special to be able to be performing again.
Yeah, I can imagine. It was wonderful. I wanted to ask a bit about study, but particularly when you were talking about mass music making like that, it reminded me that, Braimah, you've just stopped being a student, and so in a sense, even without COVID, the structures that you were used to would have gone away anyway. I mean, as all students experience when they leave an institution and don't start a new course. So, I mean, was that worse or perhaps less? Perhaps you were sort of cushioned a bit over the summer, kind of stopping being a student. That's usually a rite of passage for anybody, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, because of COVID, the whole student, because I'm in my final year and because we missed obviously so much study, having not had the whole summer term, we basically had lessons all the way through till August. I still had my lessons with my teacher all the way through. So that structure remained all the way until I did my final recital at the beginning/middle of September. And of course, it was extremely daunting to no longer be a student in a time when there is almost no work going on. So this was obviously very, very scary for me. However, because although I'm not a student, I kind of considered this year to be a kind of private master's. So I said to myself, I would like to have a year not attached to an institution, but still very much studying. And so the fact that there isn't much going on I find actually to be okay. And I think it's just lucky that I'm still a student and not someone who is, you know, trying to support a family as well, like so many musicians in the country. Yeah.
I wondered about teaching as a kind of a thing, because you talk about lessons and studying and everything, but from having heard you play, and we'll hear you play more in a while, I mean, people will wonder what there is left to learn, because, I mean, really, you know, these are such beautiful performances. So when you go to, I suppose, a fiddle lesson, I mean, what kind of thing are you expecting to work on?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the same with every art. Of course, you kind of learn in a spiral way. So the more you learn, and once you obtain this kind of level and this kind of understanding, then suddenly after understanding this, then your mind opens to this. And of course, when you're 6 years old or however old and you're just starting out, you can't possibly imagine how far you will go into thinking about it. And of course, when you're that age, you just do it because you enjoy it and you're moved by it and you don't understand why. So I think every musician can relate that, of course, the more you learn, the more fascinated you become by it and the more you realize there is to learn. And I still feel like I have so much to learn and so much to improve upon, and I learn so much from all of my lessons each time.
That's really interesting. I love the image of the spiral. That's very. I'm going to keep that. That's really, really helpful. You know, for composition teaching as well. I mean, those of us who watch masterclasses for people who are already very advanced players are always struck by the fact that when the student plays, it sounds fantastic, and you think, well, you know, what would you possibly say about that? And then the master or whoever, you know, then says something and you think, oh gosh, he's right, that was terrible, you know, and you sort of come round. And I've been watching a couple of master classes actually on YouTube. One that Brendel did at the Royal College a few years ago with two very advanced Russian pianists on Liszt Sonata, and then one that Vlado Perlmutter did many years ago in Holland on Ravel's Ondine. And the styles were very different. I mean, Perlmutter much more encouraging, I have to say, in a way than Brendel, but Brendel let the pianist play much more. Perlmutter was mostly kind of having a conversation with himself, a very interesting one, about what Ravel had said to him. I mean, have you taken part in those? Well, Tom, you may have accompanied for them as well. I don't know.
Yeah, certainly. I've taken part in lots of masterclasses at the primary academy and at the junior academy, and I think it's really kind of the most exciting thing to do, because you get to perform to an audience, and then you also get the lesson from a violinist or other musician who you really admire. And I think the challenge with a masterclass is that, of course, it's different from a lesson because it's also a kind of exhibition, because it's for the student as well as it being for the audience. So it's a kind of a case of how much information should you give and how much should they receive whilst making it accessible for the audience as well. But I always enjoy taking part in masterclasses.
That's interesting, because I know that I mean, in my field of new music, there are often sort of open rehearsals, and I've been to a lot that don't actually work, for the very simple reason that often people who sit in can't hear what's being said because it's simply a rehearsal. Whereas, you know, it's very important to put on a show, isn't it, if there is somebody listening, and there usually is. But I mean, I think for other performers watching people at your level doing that, it also seems to be important as a reminder that this kind of help doesn't kick in until you can completely play the piece. I mean, most of us think of kind of going along, having not done enough practice, to lessons and things, whereas, you know, this is at a completely different level. So a friend of mine I collaborate with said to me, when I can play the piece, I'm 40% of the way towards you know, getting up on stage. I found that quite interesting as a mathematical calibration. Tom, does that ring any bells? Would you say it's about 40% or?
I've never thought about putting a number on it, but yeah, that sounds probably correct. Yeah, I think masterclasses are a fascinating kind of activity because, as you say, it's a kind of shared. It's very different to a private lesson because there's that extra kind of aspect, which is the audience. And as soon as anyone walks into a room, and I find even if I'm practicing and someone walks in to listen or to get their coat that they've forgotten in the practice room, I don't know what it is, like there's always an energy shift. And it doesn't really matter in a way who it is. It could be your teacher, or it could be someone who has never heard someone play the piano before. And I always find that is often a very challenging thing, actually, when you have to share that space with someone and you're not expecting to. Obviously, in a masterclass, you are expecting to have an audience. But the other thing I would say about masterclasses is that and actually going back to your earlier line of conversation about the lockdown, is that we are in an amazingly fortunate position to have YouTube as a resource. And it's not just YouTube, it's kind of so much of the internet, that there are these amazing masterclasses and of course concerts and rehearsals and other things online. And I just spent so much of the lockdown just kind of stumbling across things on YouTube. And you can learn so much just by sitting at home watching things. And the really lovely thing is that it's not just things that have been created or masterclasses that have happened since YouTube has been around, because lots of people are putting lots of very old masterclasses online, which is just a real pleasure to watch. And particularly as a conductor, I really enjoy watching, masterclasses from lots of different disciplines. I find that fascinating.
Yes, well, the Perlmutter one that I was mentioning is from 1980, I think, so long before the internet was thought of. Unfortunately, the sound isn't very good, and he kind of addresses remarks away from the camera. But as you say, it's an incredible archive as well. Such an interesting thing, though, that you say there about the different attitude you have as soon as you're not just playing to yourself. Is that a big part of performing for you, regardless of what instrument or conducting, that you have to sort of get your performing trousers on, as it were? You've got to fix your head and go out, and that if somebody just bursts in and says, okay, let's hear that, I heard you were practicing, then that's quite difficult. Is there a kind of conscious kind of gear change you've got to make before a concert?
I find that to be the case, yes, definitely, is the short answer. But I found one of the really interesting things about the pandemic situation is that it's forced a lot of people to do online performances where you have no one in the room and you just have a camera. And I found that as a really kind of weird experience, because you can get however many, hits online. And in, Braimah's case, doing the online live streams in the lockdown, I think it's gone into the hundreds of thousands, hasn't it? I think, and yet there's no one really in the room to share that emotional and energetic kind of collaboration in a way. And I think this whole lockdown thing has made me really value the energy that is shared between the audience and the performer. And that sounds very kind of wishy-washy and not particularly tangible, but I think I could probably speak for almost all artists to say that.
Absolutely, and one hears it a lot. Does that resonate with you, Braimah?
Yeah, definitely. Since the lockdown began back in March, when things were looking like they were moving forward in August, I went to a handful of concerts in London. One of them was the Fantasia concert with the Dvorak Concerto and Tom conducting. And when you go into, I was suddenly way more aware of that energy between performer and audience than I ever was before, because we were so removed to it doing the online things, which of course it's great to be able to communicate, and we're very blessed to have this technology now but when you're suddenly in the room and you feel that energy, and also having done a few performances with audience more recently, I find that I really appreciate the energy, and I think that the audience are probably much more excited because they're not taking it for granted. It's not something that they do on a regular Wednesday. It's probably their first performance in weeks or months.
Absolutely. I want to turn it round and suggest that maybe audiences don't realise how important they are, because several of our guests have said this, and to me it absolutely underlines the thing that I'm always telling students, which is that listening to music is not a passive activity. Listening to music is not like watching television where you slump and kind of suck it in. It's actually, you're participating in an exchange. And it's really important to think about this. And, maybe as an audience, if not as an individual, you can actually change the course of a concert by, when people say, you're a lovely audience or something like that, I mean, that gets said so often that it must be a thing. It can't just be, just sort of guff. And so it seems to me that most audience members have no idea how important they are to the performers. I mean, again, the difference is something like cinema, where it's running anyway and you walk in and watch, or you don't. It seems to me that there's no point other, if you don't have the audience, what's it about? So as we hope to run some no audience but live streamed actual concerts from our spaces in the spring. But you guys joined everybody else that I've asked so far in saying, actually, we'd rather wait until we have an audience. And I was quite surprised that everybody said that, because, I assume there weren't many gigs around. And here, after all, is a kind of a chance to actually get up and play, although just missing the audience. And it was a real lesson for me how everybody said, even if it means waiting for a full other year, so probably meaning nearly 2 years since, the invitation first came up, they would rather that. And that is how important, 60 or 70 people sitting in a hall is. And I find that really interesting. I don't think those people have any idea, actually. At least, I don't, and I spend my life in concerts professionally and otherwise. So I think that's very interesting. And in fact, the previous chat, but one, which I did with cellist Kate Gould of the London Bridge Trio, formerly Leopold String Trio. Kate was saying how she'd done like a gig, and, it was the thrill. I mean, she was kind of clear that it was really, really important, that kind of, when the applause and the lack of that was a real huge thing. And I found that very moving. And one, small good thing about this whole period is that, that has all got put into words, which it hadn't before. And I think that's, that is really important. It would be really nice to hear just some background about your different musical paths to where you are now. I mean, you both come from musical families, I know, but at the same time, probably different. Tom, were you a trailblazer in terms, because I think you're the oldest, aren't you?
I am the oldest, yes. I wouldn't say I'm a trailblazer, but yeah. Yeah, I'm the oldest of three, and I started kind of my musical life on the violin with Suzuki, and I had an amazing teacher called Helen Brunner who kind of started it all off, really, for me in music. And so I started the violin when I was 4, and then went off to be a chorister at Westminster Abbey. So I was singing 8 services a week for 5 years, and that's an amazing training for any person, both musically and otherwise. So I had a kind of huge exposure to wide range of repertoire. We were singing plain song and new commissions in the same service pretty frequently, and it's an amazing kind of way of training musicians. And then I went to the junior academy where I met Braimah, age 13, and our violin lessons were one after the other. So that's where we first met. And then I went to Oxford University to study music, where I played the organ, and and now I'm doing a master's at the academy in conducting. So there we go. Sorry, it sounds a bit like a CV list, but
just what I wanted. But I was just interested to know. I mean, some people are the only musician in their family. That isn't the case for either of you. Were you ever conscious of having to sort of to struggle to specialize, or was it always assumed that music was a career?
It definitely wasn't and isn't still assumed that music is a career. I think it's something that I've fallen into quite naturally, I think. Although I did enjoy lots of other subjects at school, definitely. But yeah, it's what I love doing. So it's always seemed pretty natural to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is very interesting. And I have, as I say, 2 younger siblings, and we were all choristers, and we all learned Suzuki at a young age. 2 of us on the violin and 1 on the cello. So we do all have this kind of shared musicianship training, which is quite interesting. I think.
Absolutely. No, I mean, in the old days, I think composers and performers were often advised against it. It seemed that every composer one read about was, parents hoped they would become a lawyer, but they kind of ran away to be a musician, frightfully romantically. Whereas, of course, we know that the realities can be very different, Braimah, you come from an entire family of musicians, so I guess the rebellious act would be to not do it, but that didn't happen for you. Is that right?
Yeah, so music, when I first began, music was just one of many hobbies that we were doing. So I'm the second eldest. My sister Lisa began on the piano when she was 6. So when I was 4, I was, I guess, observing it and hearing it around the house, and music was always something that was played around the house. But when I first began the piano at 6, it was just one of the many things I was doing. We would do karate, gymnastics, football, other creative things, and music was just one of them. And I think music just kind of organically became the hobby, I guess, that we were most passionate about, especially after Aifta began going to the Primary Royal Academy. And I think that's when she really decided that she wanted to be a pianist. And then it kind of grew from there. Of course, when I began, Sheku and I auditioned at the same time. So when we began going down on Saturdays and meeting like-minded musicians and people who were also very passionate about music, it became gradually the thing. And then I think by the time I was 11, I had probably already decided that this was, it wasn't a career. It was more kind of, this is what I want to do. I want to do this. And then I would go to concerts in Nottingham. We have a really great concert hall there, and I would see Zuckerman would come, and Ashkenazi would come, and really amazing artists would come, and that would, of course, further the inspiration. And so it just became something, you see it, you hear it, you experience it, and you want to do it. I don't think I ever sat down as a young child and said a career, because you don't really think about career when you're that age, I guess.
No, it's wonderful how much of that, I mean, given how much everyday slog and inevitable disappointments and setbacks and all those kind of mechanical things there are, it's wonderful that you imbue your musical life with such enthusiasm and that kind of original carefree approach sounds as if it's very much still part of it from the way you talk, just doing it because you want to, which is fantastic. I love the idea of a kind of contagion of music. It seems to sort of spread through your family because someone else was doing it, where I mean, I was the only person, not the only person involved in music of any sort, but I'm the youngest, and I was the only one sort of pursuing classical music. So I'm always sort of fascinated by these kind of, these kind of mass movements in a family where everybody's playing, and I can't imagine just actually having people to play with. But that brings me to chamber music, because I know that your family, Braimah, have kind of got it together in a proper chamber music. You've got the lineup, and that's happening. Tom, what about you? I mean, were you all of it? You're not really quite all of the same generation, or is there a Fetherstonhaugh trio, or?
Well, there is. Yeah, when we were all playing string instruments. Although my two younger brothers now, one is a singer and one is a guitarist. So now not so much. Although I'm trying to get better at jazz piano, and both of them love playing jazz. So we're a guitarist, a vocalist, and a pianist. Actually, it's quite a good combination.
Yeah.
But yeah, when we were younger, we had two violins and a cello, so we did little bits of string trios, but nothing as serious as what Braimah and his siblings are so good at doing.
Absolutely. So Braimah, tell us about family chamber music. Is that something that presumably that started as fun, I'm guessing, although now probably involves concerts?
Yeah, of course. I think, yeah, when you're all playing together, the natural thing you'll want to do is, so when you're all learning individually, then the natural thing you'll want to do is play together. And I think it just luckily happened in the sense that because all of us started on the piano, and then we went on to a string instrument. So I did piano and then violin, I did piano and violin. Sheku did piano and violin, interestingly, but then switched to the cello 6 months later after seeing them in a concert. So it just organically happened that I was a pianist, I was a violinist, and Sheku was a cellist. So of course we're spoilt for piano trio repertoire, and that was something that we just began doing. And then the stuff with all seven of us is purely fun. It's purely just when we're all under the house together, and then we also enjoy arranging things as well. But I think the piano trio stuff, and also the younger three now have a piano trio as well, because it organically worked out, piano, violin, cello, that way.
So the second generation.
Yeah, so there's the old piano trio and the young piano trio, which is kind of fun. Yeah.
That is amazing. And unseriously, I have to just follow this up because I'm not a viewer, but Tom has told me you did a Strictly Come Dancing appearance. Whether dancing or playing, I'm not sure, but is that something you can tell us about? It might still be online if anybody wants to watch, which I'm sure they will.
Yeah, so that was last weekend, and that was, of course, really, really exciting because it was a performance. And
so if you're joining this video after November 2020, last weekend would be around about the 8th or 9th of November. So sorry, go on.
No, sure. Yeah, and it was very, very enjoyable. Something that something that we're not used to doing. It was kind of nice to play whilst also watching these brilliant dancers as well. And
what did you play?
We played Ave Maria, an arrangement, obviously, Ave Maria. Which is
fantastic.
Nice to play.
Something I've asked all the people that I've talked to in these chats is about the kind of mysterious kind of binding agent that makes chamber music work, and why people play with other people. I'm very interested in that. I mean, very interested in any thoughts that you've had in your experience. I mean, you must have, as students, you must have been sort of put together with people where it's worked and where it hasn't. And what's that about? I mean, Tom, you've done a couple of, you've done a big Beethoven cycle as a student, and you've done a huge amount of collaboration. You must get that feeling sometimes that kind of this is good, and I guess you must get the other feeling.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's pretty basic, really, which is just if you meet someone in the street that you've never met before and you click, then that's great. And, and you get on and you can have a chat. And often that's because you have things in common, but also often you might not have things in common. And I think that for me, like it's as simple as that. If you feel that you can get on with someone, but getting on with someone can take so many different forms. Obviously, it's not about whether they're polite and you're polite. It's not necessarily about that. It's a whole host of things which include whether you have similar musical attitudes or interested in certain repertoire or interested in exploring various ideas or being experimental or not being experimental. You know, there are so many different categories that people kind of click over, if that makes sense. So I think it's kind of, in a way, dangerous to overanalyze why you think that you get on with someone musically, or at least that's my experience. I don't know, Braimah, maybe you have a totally different experience.
No, I would definitely agree with what Tom said. I think, yeah, I would, when you brought it up, my first thought was relating chamber music to a conversation. So of course, playing a solo piece would be like a monologue, and then chamber music would be like a conversation. And I think the reason that Tom and I enjoy playing together is because we have a similar musical education. We both did music works, and so our approach and our understanding of chamber music comes from a similar background. But there are many cases in which someone comes from a completely different musical school to you, in the same way that you might meet someone from a completely different part of the world that you have nothing in common with, but when you meet, it just works. But I think, of course, the essential ingredient with chamber music is listening, as with conversation. And the people who enjoy listening and like to listen are the people that enjoy playing chamber music, and the people that are enjoyable to play chamber music with.
Yeah, and although I didn't say anything at the time, we began by hearing you both playing Tchaikovsky. Lots of people were listening will wonder what that was. So you very kindly recorded it for us. Could you just tell us, just sort of back announce it, as it were, and tell us what it was, and indeed where you were playing? That would be really nice to hear.
Hello. Yeah, that was Melody by Tchaikovsky, which is a miniature gem of the violin repertoire in E-flat major. It's a beautiful piece, and Tom and I recorded that in St. Mark's Church, which is, I think, also where Tom has been doing a lot of conducting with the Academy Opera. It's a church owned by Academy, or at least rented by Academy, that we do lots of rehearsal in. So that was Melody, Tchaikovsky in St. Mark's Church.
Well, thank you very much. And, you know, the moment you hear it, it's striking to the listener what a beautiful sound you make. And that brings me to your violin, which is a bit special, I think. Can you tell us about what's the relationship between a violinist and a violin? And can you make a beautiful sound on any instrument, or, you know, to what degree, or how, you know, how much is instrument and how much is playing?
Yeah. I think, yeah, of course, I have to first of all just say, yeah, I'm very, very lucky to be playing the violin I play. I play really, really nice VM, which is on loan to me from Beers International Violin Society through a private donor. And I've been playing on this instrument for coming up to 2 years, and I enjoy it more and more, actually, each month. And the instrument is, of course, extremely important to a string player, and string players will spend hours trying different instruments, because, of course, the instrument is your voice, essentially, or the medium through which you can communicate your voice. Now, of course, if I play a violin, and then I give that same violin to a friend, it will still sound like their voice rather than the voice of the violin. So of course it's more what you're doing on it. If I played another violin instrument, you would still hear, of course you would hear the tone of the instrument, but you would hear the personality of the player coming through as well. And I think also it's a mutual thing. So of course you express yourself through the violin, but the violin also comes with its own characteristics as well. So my sound and my playing has definitely changed in response to the violin that I have. So I've definitely learnt many things about making sound and things through the instrument that I play.
So that relationship must be almost on a level with the one we were just talking about with individuals. It's almost like a duo partner, the instrument, and you know, if somebody swapped them, it would make a huge difference, just as if they swapped your pianist or something. I mean, I think that's something that a lot of us never think about. There's a great deal of emphasis on the value of stringed instruments, but what we perhaps don't think about is the kind of I don't know what to call it, body compatibility. I mean, the sense that presumably if you picked up the wrong fiddle, it would feel different, you know, that kind of thing, that there's a certain amount of muscle memory associated with the exact feel of an instrument.
Yeah, certainly. I think because, of course, it's such a fine thing. And firstly, you're dealing with millimeters, but also all of these handmade violins are obviously being handmade and made from different woods, and therefore no two violins, of course, the factory made ones might be identical, but all of the handmade violins, there are no two that are the same. And so all of them are very different. And of course, there's a whole mystery that comes with it, in the sense that, especially with these old instruments, that of course they're making really, really amazing modern violins all the time, but there's not a replication of an instrument that's come before. So I think if you're a player and something happened to your instrument, it's almost like your child, because you can't just get another one. Of course, there's the value as well. So it would be a huge financial problem if you broke your instrument, but also it's a very personal thing, I think.
Of course, of course. Well, I very much want to hear you play something else. Our next item is just a solo, but could you introduce what we're going to hear, because it's outside the classical canon, isn't it? And I was going to ask both of you whether you're involved. Tom's already mentioned jazz, but are you also involved in sort of non-Western music and non-art music and folk music?
Yeah, I'm really interested in klezmer music, since there was a klezmer band at my secondary school that was started up by by the head of music, Vicky Manderson, and I was always loved fiddle on the roof. So I became very interested in klezmer music, and I've played around with jazz because my housemate really loves jazz, and I was in a jazz group for fun for a bit. But classical music is the main thing I do, and I wouldn't feel comfortable playing jazz on stage, for example. But I think improvisation and jazz is something that I'm definitely interested in. And I also played some pop music as well for a while for fun. And I think it's nice to try different styles as much as you can.
Of course. So what have you got for us now? So
this is Ashokan Farewell, which is a folk song written by J. Umber, who was an American, or is an American. It was written in 1980. I'm not sure if he is still alive, actually, but this was written in 1980.
And how did you come to play it, or is it just a well-known repertoire piece for?
No, I think it's certainly a popular piece, but I personally came to know it because when I was in year 8 at school, my head teacher just came to me one day and gave me the CD and said, "I really love this piece, Ashokan Farewell. I'd love you to play it in school assembly." So I took the CD and I learned it, and that was how my relationship with the piece began.
Fantastic. Well, let's hear it now. Thank you.
I would like to play a folk song called Ashokan Farewell, written in 1982 by J. Umber.
So that was one of our guests, Braimah Kanneh Mason, playing Ashokan Farewell for solo violin. So one of the things that you did, actually you probably did it a while ago, I was going to say recently, but you both featured in, was fascinating BBC documentary about the lives of some black musicians who have not been hitherto kind of, you know, given due recognition. And strangely, this led us, well, it's strange for anybody who doesn't know this story, it led us to the Kreutzer Sonata of Beethoven, one of his biggest chamber pieces, and the piece that I'm hoping you will come and play for us when our concerts resume. So, I mean, how did that come about? And Tom, could you tell us a bit of the story about how Beethoven is woven into this topic?
Yes, so what we know as the Kreutzer Sonata is tied up with a violinist called George Bridgetower. And the dedication is something that is very, in a way, sad, because Bridgetower was the person really associated with the piece, but it's become known as this Kreutzer Sonata in a way that is kind of unfair in a way, because Bridgetower was the champion of the piece. And our involvement with the BBC for documentary was just one of the many narratives that they were bringing to light about a whole host of composers and musicians from across the centuries whose stories haven't been told in the way in which they should have been. Absolutely.
So, Braimah, what do we know about George Bridgetower?
So George Bridgetower was, unfortunately, the friendship didn't last, and that's why it is actually now called the Kreutzer Sonata, not the Bridgetower Sonata. But they were friends, and I think they respected each other mutually. And George Bridgetower was, he must have been a fantastic virtuosic violinist who was extremely fearless and had an incredible facility. When they premiered the Ninth Sonata, Bridgetower was actually sight reading, because Beethoven had the ink wasn't even yet dry. So Bridgetower was literally reading the music over Beethoven's shoulder. And of course, everyone who knows the piece will know how impressive that is, because it is a very difficult piece. And
we don't know whether they've done their 40% or not.
Exactly.
Might have still been around 20 by the sound of it.
Exactly.
And did this, I have a sort of memory from the program that this took place in London, but have I got that wrong? Was it in Vienna?
Oh, I thought it. Well, I'm actually not sure where the premiere was.
I just wondered, because I was going to ask if you knew anything more about Bridgetower and where he was and how he, you know, acquired this virtuosity, you know, in terms of background and education and stuff like that.
Yeah,
he's definitely has links with England, of course, and in fact he's just buried up the road from where Braimah and I, in North London, in Kensal Green Cemetery.
Right.
But yeah, it's a very interesting story of kind of cross-European art and art flourishing at the time.
Yeah, I mean, my first thought was that Beethoven didn't have much luck with dedications, because, you know, the Eroica also underwent a dedication change, and this piece should have done and didn't. And frankly, we should be calling it the Bridgetower Sonata from now on. And, you know, I imagine that might happen. I mean, Kreutzer doesn't come out of it very well, as far as I recall. Is that right, that he was... did he ever play it? Do we know?
Yes, so Kreutzer, I think, took one look at the music and said it's too difficult and it's already been played. And I don't think Kreutzer, I read that Kreutzer didn't really care much for Beethoven's music in general. So he never played it. He clearly didn't like the piece. And
I mean, it's completely outrageous, the amount of free publicity he's had on the back of not playing this piece, because he's not just had that, he's also had a short story by Tolstoy, which in turn, I think I'm right, inspired one of the two Janacek string quartets. one of the great masterpieces of the modern quartet movement. So he's
Yeah.
done damn well out of not playing the sonata.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
Yeah, it's amazing how much history was changed just from that one argument between Bridge Tower and Beethoven.
Right, and I have a feeling that there was an affair of the heart that came between them. Is that right?
Well, so what most sources say, that seems to be the most common, is that Bridge Tower insulted a woman who he didn't know, and this person who he insulted was a woman who Beethoven cherished, and I think Bridge Tower insulted her, perhaps not knowing Beethoven's relationship with her, and then Beethoven, obviously having a temper, became.
That's a fascinating story. I mean, I think you should make a program just about this story and round the piece and play more of the piece, because we got some tantalizing snippets, you know, thanks to the BBC. But you know, we need more on this, and it's extremely interesting. I'm fascinated. So, when you look ahead, I mean, it's very difficult to look ahead in these times where projects are being cancelled and things like that. What are your kind of, how can I put it? I mean, do you kind of wait for events to happen to you, or are you very career-minded where you think, you know, I'm going to look for this, that, or join a string quartet, or win competitions, or whatever? You know, what kind of musicians are you in terms of going with the flow or being very structured?
I tend to be much more driven and hands-on with my development and with my study. So I'll set myself very rigorous and very ambitious goals with repertoire that I want to do, things that I would like to learn. And in terms of structure with regards to concerts, of course, yes, I go out and I write to people and I try to do I said most of that side of things is to do with teaching, because I'm very interested in teaching. So I like to try to organize educational things, and I love to go and play in schools, and I have a private student now as of this year, which is really, really nice. But I also teach on junior music works, and so I'd say, yeah, I try to organize many things to do with the music educational side of things, but most of my planning is to do with my studies.
Yeah, but you don't sit and wait for things to happen to you. You make them happen. And Tom, that's presumably true of you as well, because your orchestra, if there were nothing else, that must be a full-time job.
Yeah, it involves quite a lot of...
One of several full-time jobs that you have.
Wow. Yeah. But it's an amazing kind of reward process in a way, for lots and lots of work to put on things. And both Piers and Braimah, of course, you both know how much work it takes to put on events or concerts or whatever it might be, talks, you know, and I think everyone who does that kind of thing knows that at the end of the day, it is going to be worth all that work, you know, because we're doing what we love doing. Yes, I think COVID has made things even more challenging. I mean, just going back to these Dvorak concerts that we did in September, I actually spent, and going back to percentages, I think I probably spent about 50% of all of the time preparing for those concerts sitting on Excel, working out socially distanced seating plans to maximize the number of people that could come in to the space and things like that just I'd never have dreamt that you know, that I would had to do that, and I don't think anyone who puts on concerts or events ever thought that would have to be the case. But obviously in these times, that's the kind of thing that you have to do to be able to play, or to at least to organize your own things. And I think it's totally worth it. But yeah, it's a labor of love often.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anytime running an orchestra, anytime, you know, is a huge thing, particularly, I mean, it's different. I mean, an orchestra which is there playing every week is a different kind of job again, I guess, but this is only part of what you do. And you're also involved in operatic performance, because we have to still think of you as a student to a degree, that you are still at the Academy. So could you just tell us about your operatic project, even though as we speak it's currently in limbo, but hopefully will have happened soon after.
Indeed. Yeah, so we've been really lucky at the Academy, because we're a university, to be able to carry on almost life as usual during this second lockdown. This term, the opera at the Academy is Britain's Midsummer Night's Dream, and I'm really fortunate to be the assistant conductor on it. My teacher, Sian Edwards, is the conductor of the project, and there's a wonderful cast and creative team, and we're doing it with 2-meter distancing and all COVID compliance, of course. One of the challenges has been that the orchestra can't fit into the orchestra pit with the 2 meters distancing, and even into the theatre there were lots of complications if we had some of the orchestral members in the seating or whatever in the theatre. So we've had to do an orchestral recording of the piece. So the orchestra has been recorded and without the singers, and the singers are going to be singing on top of the orchestra, and I have been producing that recording as part of my role, which has been an amazing experience for so many reasons, not least just to be able to hear the Britain orchestration just on its own without the singers, and really it's just amazing writing. I think it's such a fantastic piece.
Yeah. And what an extraordinary experience to take away from being a student. I mean, it gives you a head start, in terms of being involved with opera and all the kind of multifaceted things that involves, and also in terms of recording, even if you perhaps didn't expect to, and all those practical things are huge, aren't they? Definitely.
And I think any kind of young conductor would agree that like any opportunity is a good opportunity, and being able to do any of this stuff is just such a privilege and a real pleasure as well. I mean, that's the amazing thing also, that I just feel so lucky to be able to be working with amazing people and amazing music, and that's such a pleasure. That's
another great benefit of going to a global institution like the Royal Academy, that you meet everybody else, and those will be your kind of the people you turn to. When you need a horn in 15 years' time, you'll have one. You come away with a whole sort of sense of who your contemporaries are, which is a fantastic thing as well. I mean, I say that as a composer, where the actual practice is sort of very lonely, not lonely, but it's very isolated. And the idea of everybody kind of, creating these wonderful projects at an institution like the Academy always seems to me, it always has a kind of mystical romance about it, possibly just because of the isolation of what I do. The other week I watched the Academy Strings playing Strauss Metamorphosen, and it's incredibly moving, and I had to go back and watch it again the other day, but because of somehow you would probably get that passion and commitment anyway, but it somehow seems sort of more moving when everybody has to be distanced and wearing masks to play and things. It seems like we're saying, we won't let this beat us, and that's very powerful. So thank you very, very much, both of you, for giving us your time and for joining us today to talk about what would have been a recital appearance at Music at Queen's, but which will be next year, possibly less than a year from now, hopefully, but certainly in the new season of next academic year, when we very much look forward to welcoming you back. And thank you so much in the meantime for sharing all your experience and insights. It's really wonderful. If we couldn't have the music, it's great to have your ideas and thoughts. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much so much for having us. Thank you.